Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. The release of the Freyr DLC pack in Age of Mythology Retold was very, very exciting for me. At long last, the game acknowledges that every one of the cultures it features has way more gods than the ones that they currently have listed, and we get to see a few of them represented. And as per usual, it started to get me thinking, what if we took it further? And as such, today, to kick off a new series on this channel, I would like to answer the question, what other new gods could we add to the Norse in Age of Mythology? Yes, Freyr and Ullr and Ygir and Vidar are all well and good, but I think we can take it a whole lot further. Because it's me, and of course I would take it a whole lot further. So before we dive in, if it's your first time coming to my channel, here's a brief overview of my approach. I like to be true to the myths, as faithful as possible to the source material. I hate using pop culture to design factions, gods, etc. And I try to make my designs believable but boundary pushing, feeling like they could maybe fit into the game, but way more complex and authentic than the game sees now. The more, the merrier. I am a maximalist in every possible way. I am not a trained classicist, I am a hobbyist, so apologies for any pronunciation mistakes. Also of note, I am going to be using simplified English names for all of these gods, and in addition to pronunciation, I get stuff wrong all the time and need to dramatically simplify for these presentations, so please let me know in the comments if you have any corrections. Along those lines, if you want to support me in what I do, please do leave a comment. I want to hear your input, and if you are interested in seeing more from me, you can like and subscribe. You got a couple bucks, you can donate to me on Ko-Fi, and if you would like to join our Discord server, you can find it in the description down below. We have good fun. But before we dive into the list, a brief word from this video's sponsor. This is not a paid sponsorship. This is a buddy of mine, the incredibly talented artist Greg Taylor, who has created his own RPG called Guardians Not. It is a dark fantasy setting, very reminiscent of the Conan mythos, if you're familiar, but it also draws heavily from Northern European paganism and portrays it quite beautifully in its in-game world. The art is spectacular. Greg is an incredibly talented artist. He does all of the work for my game Enclave as well, but the game itself is also very fun, quick, accessible. If you are interested in buying Guardians Not, you can find a link to Greg's website right down in the description. I would highly recommend you check his stuff out. And with that said, we move on to the top contenders in our list. These are the gods I actually think would be pretty likely to get in if we get a second Norse DLC. Beginning with Frigg, the big lady herself, queen goddess of the Aesir and mother of Balder, Höder, Hermodr, and many, many others. She was connected with magic, prophecy, marriage, and many other things besides, and she had a whole army of lesser goddesses as her attendants. Now, of note, many people believe that Frigg is the same character as Freya, who is obviously already portrayed in-game. And the two goddesses do share many similarities, although it is not 100% fact that Frigg and Freya were the same. Some believe that the two were like mirror images of each other, distinct people, but meant to be kind of similar yet opposite. Hell, Frigg could even be like a new title taken on by Freya after she married into the Aesir themselves. Now, I think that Frigg would probably be like a mythic age god exclusive to Odin if she were to be implemented. However, how I'd like to see her implemented is as a fifth major god. Yes, I do think she is that important. Even if she is the same person as Freya, I don't care. We should promote Freya to a major god in that case. She is just that important. Now for this list, I haven't done a full design for these gods. I don't have myth units, I don't have technologies, but I do have threads, kind of basic ideas that I could spin out into bonuses or powers or similar down the line. You can think of this kind of like a scouting run for future videos where I go way more into depth. So for Frigg, my first thread is Seder. This was like a Norse fate magic, usually practiced by female shamans called Völva. And this was largely the domain of Frigg. She was like the Seder master. So maybe she could unlock the Völva as a hero, which would be pretty frickin' sick, I think. Or maybe have some sort of information or vision-based technologies or god powers available to her. Another thread could be the oaths of protection that Frigg forced every living being to swear to never harm her son Balder. save the mistletoe, which he thought too unimportant, hence the whole story with Loki getting Höður to kill Baldur. This could maybe make for like an armor bonus or some kind, but I think it would be even more cool if it was a god power, where you like force something not to harm a specific unit of yours. I kind of think that's sick. Another one, Frigg's favor was very important for other gods to acquire. So I think it would be cool if she had like a championing mechanic, where she like boosted one of your other minor gods, implying that they had earned her favor. And the last of the threads I wanted to mention would be the spinning distaff, which is like a weaving tool, which was the main symbol of Seidr magic practitioners. And it should definitely be referenced somewhere on her build, though exactly how, I am not sure. This, by the way, is all stuff that is attributed primarily to Frigg rather than to Freya. So I'm assuming for purposes of this build that the two are completely distinct. However, there are other options besides. Moving on to our other topmost contender, we have Mimir. He is famously the god of wisdom. Killed by the Vanir in the Aesir-Vanir War, Odin ended up preserving his severed head and carried around that head as an advisor that would speak mystical truths to him. It's not really clear what Mimir's parentage was. Maybe he was a brother to Odin's mother Bestla, which would actually make him a Jötun, funnily enough. And some believe his wife to have been a Jötun as well. He was famously the guardian of the Well of Wisdom, Mimisbrunner, claiming Odin's eye in exchange for a drink, and his name is actually the root of the English word memory, cognate with several other Indo-European root words as well. I see him as actually being a classical era god available to Odin and Freyr. For threads, I think the obvious one is his role as advisor to the gods even after death. You could do it as like a line of sight bonus, map reveal effect, maybe a tech bonus, but I think it would be cool if those triggered on having heroes die or having low HP. So if a hero died, maybe they like retain line of sight in that area for like 5 minutes thereafter or something. That could be sick. Another one, sacrificing for knowledge. So similar to above, I think a theme of intentionally hurting your own guys or getting a benefit from your guys hurting could be really cool. Maybe a god power that let you actively like have one of your own unit's HPs to give them some sort of big beneficial effect. On to a slightly more obscure thread. Did you know that another name for Yggdrasil, the Norse world tree, was likely Mimameidr in reference to Mimir's name himself? He is often tied into the world tree, and this would make for yet another potential cool map reveal sort of effect, a wood bonus, and you could even have the great rooster of Yggdrasil, Vidopnir, as his myth unit, which I think would be sick. Attack of the Chicken! Kind of connected to this would be Mimir's many connections to Ragnarök. For example, his drinking horn was called Gjallarhorn, same as the horn that Heimdallr would use to announce the onset of Ragnarök. And also, the sons of Mim are attested as being present during the Great Battle of Ragnarök, though exactly who these sons were and whether they were a metaphor or not is not known. This could be another justification for, like, death destruction perks. Like, maybe free Hersers spawning occasionally like shades as your units die. There's all sorts of options, and I think it makes for a very coherent kit with him having all of these on-death style effects. I think it would be very, very sick and make him a perfect addition to the current Norse roster that plays different from anything else that they have. The final top contender I wanted to mention to you would be Höður, or Höður in a slightly more authentic pronunciation. He was the blind son of Odin and Frigg, the brother of Baldur, who famously, mistakenly killed his brother through Loki's trickery, firing the fateful mistletoe arrow. While Höður is not widely attested before this particular story, he was probably linked to warfare due to the root of his particular name. And he was later killed by Odin's new son, Vali, who aged to adulthood in a day just for the purposes of killing him. Höður and Baldur are by some sources said to even reconcile in the underworld and emerge after Ragnarök. I'd also put him as a classical era god available to Loki, who tricked him of course, and Frigg, his mother. Now for threads, there's actually a lot of interesting stuff you can do with Höður. For example, the mistletoe arrow, the famous weapon he used to kill Baldur. Whether it's a spear or a javelin is not actually clear, but regardless, Höður is obviously linked to archery or javelins of some kind because of it, and he should definitely buff those units. But wait, the Norse don't have archers. They do have that new hero unit that throws spears, so maybe you can buff that. Or just add some frickin' archer units. One of the two. Another of the potential threads, blindness. Höður's defining trait is his inability to see, a metaphor for how he can be led astray and tricked. Contrasting with his obvious strength. He's very powerful but needs to be aimed. This could be maybe tied to like a trade-off tech, where your units, like your ranged units, have worse line of sight, but higher attack. I think something like that could be really, really cool. And another note for him is that he's very courageous and strong. He was almost certainly a god of warfare, so his kit could like give other types of buffs besides just to projectile units, even if he mostly focused on the range side of your army. He shouldn't be an eco god, let me put it that way. It should be war, war, war with him. Another threat I want to mention would be friendly fire. This should definitely be present somewhere in his kit. I know that people don't like friendly fire and hurting your own guys, but I think it would make so much sense for him, especially if it had great power behind that trade-off. Like, what if, for example, his god power let you shoot an arrow in a specific direction that hurt all allies and enemies equally in its path? That sounds so fun. Just plow out a section of the map with an arrow. Sick. But from here, we move on to some high contenders. Stuff that maybe could get in, but I think is way less likely than the former three. Though I would absolutely put them all in. Beginning with Sif, Thor's wife. She of the great golden hair, maybe even a goddess of grain. She was the mother of Ullr by an unknown father, as well as Thor's Valkyrie daughter Thrudr. And as mentioned, she was most famous for her luscious golden hair, which Loki naughtily cut at one point in a story. Thor gets enraged, forces Loki to swear to put things right, and in so doing, Loki ends up commissioning a golden crown for Sif in exchange for cutting her hair, along with a bunch of other legendary artifacts. I see Sif as being a heroic age goddess available to, obviously, Thor, as well as Loki, who cut her hair. For threads, like I mentioned, Sif's hair being cut led to many great artifacts being created, including Mjolnir. Yes, it was because her locks got chopped that Thor got his hammer. I think it would be so sick if Sif somehow gave you extra relics, or like gave you new benefits for controlling relics, to represent like the artifact that sprung from this one incident. That could be so sick. And another thread for her, gold as a color is a recurring motif. Her golden hair, her golden crown, and golden wheat. This is why she is believed to be a goddess of grain, because her golden hair was believed to represent golden wheat in the sun. And so because of that, what if she allowed your farmers to generate gold while they worked? I think it's pretty cool. Another option, the Earth-Sky pairing. Another reason why Sif is often associated with grain, or believed to be like a fertility goddess, is because it would make her part of an Earth-Sky pairing with Thor. This is common in Indo-European mythology, a sky god and an earth goddess being paired up. I'm not really sure what this would mean, but maybe an eco bonus, like tied to favor. And last thread I have, a girl worth fighting for, because her honor was important enough to make Thor go apeshit. So I think a retaliation bonus would be really, really cool. So maybe it gave you a bonus when like counter-punching against an opponent after they, I don't know, destroyed a town center or a temple or something. That could be pretty sick. From here, we move on to another high contender, that being Sigyn. You might have heard of her before as well. We just saw Thor's wife. This is Loki's wife, famously catching the venom condemned to drip upon him after his binding until the days of Ragnarök. She had two sons, Vali and Nari, and her son Vali was actually transformed into a wolf, ripping out the guts of his brother Nari as part of Loki's punishment, the entrails of which were then used to bind him. So besides her relationship to Loki and her devotion to him in his entrapment, not much is known about her. She may have been a goddess in her own right, but if so, that information has been lost to time. I see her being a mythic age goddess available solely to Loki. For threads, the bowl of venom. This was the most iconic symbol. It should definitely give some sort of like poison damage or effect, which I don't believe the Norse have yet. Another thread, writhing earthquakes. The Norse belief for why earthquakes existed was that every time Sigyn had to take away the bowl of venom to dump it out, a few drops of venom would hit Loki, he would writhe in pain, and his writhing would create earthquakes. This could be a sick god power. Yes, I know earthquake already exists. I don't care. It doesn't belong on Artemis. That's frickin' stupid. So either give earthquake to Sigyn, or come up with another earthquake adjacent thing instead. Another thread, Vali's killing of Nari. Vali's wolf transformation could also maybe be a god power or a myth unit or even a tech. And then Nari's entrails were used as Loki's bindings, though that's a little grisly, it being her own son and all. So maybe it can be referenced in a less direct way. And lastly, female companion of victory, which is the current best guess as to the direct translation of Sigyn's name, which might hint at her pre-binding role as a goddess. So maybe it could be a more generic unit buff to round out her kit, because it sounds to me, based on that name, that she may have been associated with warfare before her iconic role in Loki's binding. With that, we move on to another high contender, Vili and Ve, a twin god. Yes, you get both of them at once. They both count as a single god for the purposes of picking minor deities. They are the twin brothers of Odin, who helped him slay the great Ymir and from his corpse create the world. They are even, in some stories, credited with helping Odin create the first man and woman, Ask and Embla, and while they are not often mentioned, they are sometimes described as governing in Odin's stead while he was out on trips and stuff like that. Their names translate to willpower and holiness, roughly speaking, though they do not have any official domains and normally seem to act and be mentioned together at all times. They'd be a classical era god, and they'd be available to Odin, as well as to his wife Frigg. For some threads about Vili and Ve, giant slayers. They obviously helped Odin kill Ymir, so how cool would it be if they gave like infantry units a bonus versus myth units, maybe even scaling on how large the myth unit is. It's wacky, but I think it could be so sick. Like, or even something more simple, like small bonus versus myth, huge bonus versus titans. That sounds pretty fun to me. Another one, crafting, Ask, and Embla. Vili is said to have given humans intelligence, and Ve given them expressiveness, speech, and the 5 senses, with Odin giving them the animating sacred spark that brought them fully to life. So maybe this could be some cool buffs to specific unit types like gatherers and infantry. Another one, forming the world from Ymir's body. This is kind of a wacky idea, but what if on killing a myth unit, you could get a free building in its corpse? That could be kind of fun. Or something less dramatic like a map reveal, building speed bonus, or something like that. They should help you construct, especially early in the game. And lastly, governing in Odin's stead. Now, I'm not sure what this would look like per se, but maybe their god power could involve swapping out your god bonuses, like your major god bonuses, for a new set. It's kind of freaking weird, but I think it could be so cool if they, like, briefly replaced your major god. And this is referencing to them governing for Odin. According to one story, even sharing his wife while he was gone. Yes, that probably means what you think it means, hence why they have Frigg as a major god option. And possibly good justification for a god power that lets you swap out your major god. From here, however, we move on from the likely things, or at least the slightly likely things, and on to some stuff that definitely isn't making it into the game. The mid-contenders. I would be thrilled if some of these guys made it in, and I guess there's a tiny chance of it, but I think it is very unlikely. Doesn't mean we won't talk about it, though, beginning with Vali. Not Loki's son Vali, this is Odin's son Vali. Yes, they are spelled the same way. He was the son of Odin and the Jotun Rindir, born with the express purpose of avenging Balder, which he did promptly. He grew from newborn to adult in a single day, killed Höder, and then bound Loki with the entrails of his son Nari, leaving Sigyn to tend to him as mentioned. He is also said to be one of the very few gods who will survive Ragnarök. He would be a heroic age god, available both to Thor and to Frigg. You could definitely argue that Odin would be more appropriate here, but he's the major god for a lot of people, so I kind of wanted to spread the love a little bit. For threads on Vali, first of all, the Wrathful Avenger. He should absolutely have a Berserk buff of some kind, though I would want to make sure he didn't step on the toes of Vidar. They are kind of similar, both being vengeful gods, children of Odin who would survive Ragnarök, but they are not the same person once again. Another thread, Adult in a Day. If I've ever heard a training speed bonus, it's this. Maybe even getting bonus training speed based on recent deaths of your soldiers across the map. How cool would that be? Another thread, his marksmanship. Once again, much like Höder, this is a perfect opportunity for an archery bonus. He is explicitly attested to have been a great archer. And this once again draws attention to how stupid it is that the Norse have no bow units. Remind me why? Contrived mechanical identity? Please. Lastly, the Arguer. That is the best guess for what his name directly translates to, and might lend itself to another melee combat bonus. I'm not as sure about this one, but there's definitely potential for him to be a super cool combat-oriented god that buffed a lot of different types of units in a wide variety of ways. Yet another mid-contender would be Hönir. This is another not often attested god, but one who pops up in a couple of different interesting Norse sources. He is sometimes believed to be another name for Odin's brother Vili. Reason being is because some sources say that it was Hönir and another god who made Ask and Embla alongside Odin instead of Vili and Ve. So maybe they're just like the same guy by a different name. I'm honestly not certain. I also just realized I'm saying Vili and Ve with a hard V when it should be Vili and Ve, but whatever. I've committed to it this long. So anyways, Hönir and Mimir were actually the two hostages sent by the Aesir to the Vanir during their war. This this obviously concluded with Mimir being killed by the Vanir, kicking off the war more properly. And another more obscure story from the Faroe Islands, called the Lokatatur, actually links Hönir to storks and swans as a protective god, which is pretty interesting too. And this is supported also by some of his epithets and other names. I would place him as a heroic age god available to Odin and Freyr. Now, for threads, first of all, impressive chieftain. Hönir is described as being tall, strong, and handsome, and was impressive enough to actually have been given like some authority by the Vanir during his time as a hostage, so I think a bonus to like Hersers and Jarls seems pretty appropriate. Let him buff your chieftainly units, so to speak. Another thread could be Waterbird defenses. In the Lokatatur, he summons swans to protect a boy. So maybe summoning defensive waterfowl could be a god power, or more likely he could have some sort of waterbird adjacent myth unit. Another thread, storks delivering babies. This is kind of a stretch, but he might have been connected to fertility because of his stork theming. The whole storks delivering babies thing is a very old European tradition that definitely seems to have been referenced in Norse sources, so having him give like a gatherer training buff probably isn't that much of a stretch. And last interesting little note about him, he had great reliance on Mimir. Despite him having supposedly given wit and intelligence to Ask and Embla, he clearly wasn't a great decision maker because, according to the myth, while he was a hostage among the Vanir, every time they asked him a question or to make a decision, he would hem and haw and then eventually go over to Mimir and have Mimir make the decision for him. So I thought it would be sick if Hönir could benefit from other gods' technologies being researched in some way. Kind of like Rhea gives you like a favor refund. What if Hönir actually gave you like a different, more explicit buff if you researched other gods' technologies before his? I don't know. Something like that seems really, really cool. But anyways, he's still pretty obscure, so I think a mid-contender makes more sense. Much like the next entry on our list, Gefjon. She is another more obscure figure who, kind of like Hönir, features pretty prominently in a couple of different stories, even if those stories aren't the best known. She was a goddess of the plow, connected with prophecy and fertility / agriculture writ large. Some think that she is an aspect of Frigg, but this is more of a fringe theory and I don't personally ascribe to it. In her most famous story, she plowed out Lake Mälaren in Sweden and carried the soil all the way to Denmark to form the island of Zealand, where Copenhagen currently sits. Another story features Loki insulting her, and then Odin saying to him, "Geez, dude, shh, calm down. Gefjon is not someone you want to mess with." And when Odin says that, you know you're pretty special. Because of that, she would be available to Odin and Loki. To talk about some threads for her, her 4 oxen sons. In some accounts, she is described as a virgin. And yet, she also seems to have had 4 sons, which she transformed into oxen to yoke her plow to. Kind of weird, but it does mean that generating herdables, or maybe even letting herdables fight, sounds very apropos for her. That actually sounds really sick. Battle oxen, charge! Next thread, plow terraforming. Obviously, her plowing out the lake and using it to make an island sounds like a great god power. Maybe creating like a temporary fissure on land that your opponents can't cross, or an island at sea. That sounds so sick. Another thread, a woman scorned. Like I said, Odin was scared of her getting mad, and that, to me, lends itself to some sort of combat bonus. Maybe a siege bonus of some kind to reference her, like, terraforming abilities. She definitely seems pretty indomitable and destructive, so yeah, a siege bonus sounds at least plausible for her. And lastly, fate and virginity. I'm not sure how she could have been a virgin, frankly, but she was linked to Seidr fate magic, like what Frigg has. Maybe there's a way to translate that to something cool that links in well with the rest of her kit. I'm not sure yet, though, on this front. With that, however, we move past the realm of plausibility and in to long shots. I would be stunned if these ever made it into the game, and yet, as per usual, I believe they deserve to be discussed in full. Beginning with Fulla, as it would happen. She was the virginal confidant of Frigg, pretty much the chief among her advisors, and possibly her sister, and is associated with abundance and wisdom. She has no known children or family whatsoever, and she is often linked with service and duty because of her role as Frigg's main handmaiden and second in command. She is also sometimes described as a harvest goddess, though this seems kind of like a force to me. She is at one point referenced in a healing charm alongside Frigg and Nanna, who we will get to momentarily. I would attribute her as a heroic age god available solely to Frigg, who she served faithfully at all times. In terms of threads, the one I would like to mention first is her role as the keeper of the eski. An eski was like an ashwood box, and Friggs held her most prized possessions that Fulla kept as its keeper. This also relates to her role as a secret keeper for Frigg. So I think that's something that let you like turn buildings invisible or stash things away to like hide them from the world. Maybe even stashing away a god power or something, though I'm not really sure what that would actually look like. All seem like stuff that Fulla should be able to do. Another thread, the horse cure charm. Like I said, Fulla is implicated in a healing spell, so she should definitely have a healing effect of some kind, as should her role as Frigg's cunning messenger be represented. At one point, Fulla helps a mortal discover a disguised Odin on Frigg's behalf, so maybe she could give you like a counter or a heads up when another god uses a power. A final thread, her golden ring and headgear. Now, Fulla is described as beautiful but modest, keeping her hair covered and wearing many precious artifacts. So maybe you could do like a relic bonus, or maybe some sort of gatherer buff, or something that intersected the two together. I think it would be very cool to find a way to semi-authentically reference it. As another long shot, we have Hermod, or Hermodr. He is yet another son of Odin and Frigg, who volunteered to ride to Hel, the underworld, to try to negotiate the release of his brother Balder after his other brother Höður accidentally killed him. But besides this major claim to fame, he isn't really mentioned all that much. He doesn't have any explicit domains, but his name translates roughly to battle frenzy, once again implying some sort of war god. He also might have been Odin's servant rather than his son, but son seems a lot more likely. He is, of note, the only one besides Odin to ever ride the legendary eight-legged horse Sleipnir. He would be a mythic age god available to Odin and Frigg. For threads, first and foremost, the ride to Hel. He needs to have a big focus on cavalry. Maybe giving them like a berserk-like low health attack buff to reference his name, or protection against myth units. And similarly, his horsemanship aboard Sleipnir was said to be legendary. Specifically, he is said to have performed great feats of agility while riding. So because of that, get this, he jumped to the gates of Hel on Sleipnir. So what if he gave Jarls and Raiding Cav a leap attack like an Anubite? That sounds so sick to me. Another thread, bargaining for Balder. He is the one who begs Hel, remember Hel is the name of the goddess and the place, for his brother's release, and is even able to negotiate a potential agreement, but it fell apart by no fault of his own. I'm not sure how you would implement this kind of bargaining mechanic, but I love the theme, and I think it would complement his cavalry focus really, really nicely. And as a final thread, the bearer of gifts. He returned from Hel with treasures from Balder and Nanna, and he distributed them among the other gods. So maybe another relic bonus, or for example, making heroes equipped with relics way tougher. That could be kind of sick. Or maybe a hero who died while holding a relic would have the relic teleported to a temple to safety or something like that. While I think Hermodr is a distinct long shot, his really unique cavalry focus is something we don't see anywhere else really on the Norse, and I think it would be absolutely sick. So call him a disproportionate favorite for me, despite me having him as a long shot. And speaking of which, yet another long shot would be Nanna, referenced just now, the wife of Balder, dying broken-hearted at his side to join him in Hel. She is the mother of Forseti, who we have in game right now, and is the daughter of a completely unknown god named Nepr. She is sometimes called a goddess of love, but she doesn't really seem to have any specific dominion in the actual texts. She's closely associated with grief and devotion, however, and occasionally linked with springtime. I have her as a heroic age god available to Thor and to Frigg. For threads, you can't think about Nanna without talking about her devotion as a wife. I think it could be cool if maybe she had a god power that let you pair up units, giving them super buffs while they fight next to each other, but if one dies, they both die. Sounds pretty cool. Another option, following Balder into Hel. Once again, I think an on-death beneficial effect seems appropriate, especially given that Nanna and Balder held places of honor in Hel. Another god power option for her, for example, could be a funeral pyre effect that like torched a section of ground and it hit your units and enemy units indiscriminately, but if your units died, they gave you a benefit. Something like that could be really sick. Another option for us to discuss would be Breiðablik, the Hall of Balder and Nanna. This was a legendary building in Asgard, possibly tied to the Milky Way, the Hall of Stars. Maybe it could be a building bonus or a favor bonus of some kind, or maybe the two together. But either way, it should be referenced on her somehow. And as a final thread, kind of like with Hermóður, gifts from the underworld. Nanna sent Hermóður back from his unsuccessful quest to save her and Baldur with gifts for several goddesses. So once again, we can tie this into the on-death effects mentioned above. Regardless, this thread once again links her in with on-death effects, kind of like what we discussed with Mimir earlier. As you can see, there's not that much known about her, so we're starting to have to kind of reach a little bit in order to get decent threads for her. That's not to say I can't make a good design for her, but it does mean to say that we are getting into obscure territory. Welcome to the mega long shots, ladies and gentlemen. Things start to get a little weird from here on out. Beginning with Gná. Who the hell is that? Well, she is yet another of Frigg's many handmaidens. She was the messenger of Frigg, traveling between worlds on her behalf atop her legendary horse Hofvarpnir. Apparently she also featured in a recent God of War game, and judging by the art and the wiki entry for it, she was done very, very dirty. She held a reasonably high rank, but is still quite obscure. Her name probably translates to like to loom above, a clear reference to her ability to fly atop her legendary horse. And she is also loosely connected to trances and spiritual journeys, with her traveling between worlds being like an esoteric metaphor for communing with the divine. I see her as being a classical era goddess, available to both Freyr and Frigg. In terms of threads, we first have to talk about her horse Hofvarpnir. His name translates roughly to hoof thrower. Gná was more famous for her horse than anything else, so I think a cav combat buff feels very appropriate, especially given the aggressive inclination that his name implies. Similarly, Hofvarpnir was able to gallop across water and air, so I think a god power that let units briefly fly or cross water could be sick, or if not that, maybe a bonus that let cav temporarily do this instead of some kind. Similarly, Gná's role as a transcendent courier feels like it could be appropriate for a favor bonus, maybe giving you favor as you explore the map. That could be kind of funky. In one of the few stories where Gná is directly attested, the Vanir who see her flying comment, "What flies there?" unable to make out her mystical figure on the horizon. And because of this, plus her mysterious, not well-attested nature, maybe she could give your cavalry a stealth effect of some kind. It's a bit of a stretch, but it would certainly make for some cool gameplay and does tie into some elements of her grounding, so I think it could be really, really cool. And yet, it's a mega long shot, which is why she is in this section. Speaking of mega long shots, we have to now talk about Magni and Mörði. These two were sons of Thor, said to be some of the few to survive Ragnarök, and even taking up Mjolnir to follow in their father's footsteps and presumably lead the new world. They were probably twins, with their mother being the Jötun Jarnsaxa, but it is not entirely clear. They may have come from different mothers. Their names translate to mighty and wrath, respectively. At just 3 days old, Magni is said to have saved his father Thor from the Jötun Hrungnir, lifting the great giant off of his father in a way no other god could. But besides this story, the twins don't really feature much besides their implicit role post-Ragnarök. I would have them being a mythic age god available solely to Thor, a dual god like Vili and Ve. For threads, strongest of them all. Like I said, Magni lifted a giant at 3 days old, and Mörði was likely no slouch either, so an infantry attack bonus seems right, maybe especially against buildings or heavy armored enemies. As another thread, we have Gulfaxi, the gold-maned horse. Thor's gift to little Magni for saving him was this legendary steed, a horse just shy of Sleipnir's speed and beauty. So because of this, they gotta have a cavalry bonus, which would give the twins a very rounded military focus, letting them benefit both your infantry and your cavalry. As another thread, we have the inheritors of Mjolnir. Maybe they could actually have a god power that lets them chuck around the hammer. That would be sick, because I know we all want to see that on Thor, but it wouldn't be possible with him being a major god. Or maybe even the twins could bestow Mjolnir on a unit for protection and power, or, and here's my favorite, why not both? The first time you use the power, you throw the hammer. The second time, you bless a unit, and then it goes back to throwing the hammer. They are twins after all, so having a modular god power makes a lot of sense for them. Last thread, the leaders of the new world. They should have some sort of unconventional eco bonus. Like maybe something that gives you a bonus when rebuilding on rubble, or get this, what if they let you build town centers for free? They're a Mythic Age god, so it's not like 2-game warping, but it would definitely reference pretty effectively them helping the world resettle after Ragnarok. Actually, these guys kind of fit in with Hermodr as being like disproportionately cool for how unlikely they are, so even if it's a mega long shot, I would love to see them in game, especially if some bonuses like this could be referenced. But from here, we move on to the ultra mega long shots. You thought that was unlikely? This stuff is never getting in. I will eat a ghost pepper on camera if one of these even gets referenced in the game, but let's dive into it, because these are pretty freaking obscure. Beginning with Lothr. Who the heck is this? You probably haven't heard of him before. I sure didn't before I started doing my research. He is one of the most mysterious Norse gods, attested in many stories, but still very ambiguous. Some believe him to be another name for Odin's brother Ve, or for Freyr, or, much more popularly, a benevolent form of Loki. He is referenced as Odin's friend, mighty and loving, so he definitely isn't Loki outright, but maybe he's like Loki on a good day, under a new name. And the connections between Loki and Lothr are actually pretty substantial, so this theory is likely not terribly far off. But regardless, he replaces Ve alongside Odin and Hönir in some versions of the Ask and Emblem myth, though he is also attested in passing in many other stories as well. There's also a theory that his name is the source of Saturday, Lothr's Day. Possible and kind of cool, but I think it's unlikely. Anyways, I would have him as a Mythic Age god available to Loki, shocker, and Freyr, since that's another god that he was potentially considered to be. For threads, most of these reference Lothr's most famous story in the creation of Ask and Embla, beginning with the gift of health, which is a very rough translation of what he gave to humanity. So maybe it could be like a strong HP buff. Another thread could be warm blood, which is yet another translation of what Lothr gave to Ask and Embla. So maybe another justification for an HP buff or like a vigor boost of some kind to certain units, though this translation is highly contested. Yet another thread could be the implications of fertility and his role as a creator god of some kind. He is connected to Freyr because of this, after all. So maybe a big economy or town center or gatherer boost could be in order? I'm not entirely sure. But there's not a whole lot of material out there, so we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel on this one. The last thread, and kind of my favorite that I want to share, is his implication of being the good Loki. So what if Lothr twisted certain traits that Loki has in-game and made them like the good version of those traits? Like, for example, what if his Hersers could spawn in other heroes, kind of like how Loki spawns in myth units? It's a little derivative, so I wouldn't want that to be the entirety of the god, but I think a cute reference or two would certainly not be out of order. But after Lothr, we come to the single most obscure Norse god that I have on this list, Meili. So who the hell is Meili? Well, he is a son of Odin. He's only attested twice, and both times in passing. He's invoked by his brother Thor at one point, with great pride, hinting at potentially a much greater role that has been completely lost to time. Thor seems to have been very proud that Meili was his brother. His name gives us some hint as to his role as well. It could be interpreted either as handsome or as mile walker. Some believe him to actually be another name or form of Baldur, though this seems unlikely, and literally the only evidence is that his name could mean handsome and he was a son of Odin. There's another theory that he was even a Hermes-esque god of travel because of the mile walker part of his name, which would be very cool and would link to Odin, who also has substantial implications in travel as well. Regardless, I have Meili as a classical age god available to both Odin and Thor. From here, let's talk about some threads, and I'll warn you, these are stretches, beginning with the name translation of Mile Walker. A movement bonus would be absolutely mandatory, maybe as a god power, kind of like the 7-league step, if you've heard of that before. As well as travel's role in Scandinavia being extremely important. It would make sense that they had their own Hermes equivalent, so to speak, that maybe could lend itself well to a trade or naval bonus of some kind. Another thread we could follow would be his role as the other handsome god alongside Baldur. He's mentioned alongside Baldur both times that he is discussed, perhaps implying some sort of equivalency between the two, even if they were not the same person. So maybe he could give a protective benefit, because in mythology, beauty often helps ward away danger and evil, so maybe something like that could fit. And the last thread I want to talk about would be his obscurity. This is kind of wacky even for me, right? But what if, because he was such an obscure god, he hid your age up and god choice? So like your opponent wouldn't know you had aged up and wouldn't know you had picked Meili. ever. They would have to like infer it just by playing against you. That could be super freaking fun, but is very wacky indeed. But that's what ultra long shots are for. Wackiness, because there's no way these guys are getting in, and as such we can get really creative with them. But that brings us to the end of the God entries. Now I want to talk briefly about some notable omissions that you may have noticed from this list, because there are so many important figures in Norse mythology that we weren't able to touch upon in these slides today. I tried to keep this list to the Aesir tribe of Norse gods, as opposed to the Vanir. This both will help ensure that this video isn't too long, which it already is, and will also give more of an identity to the Norse, and also allow for more Norse-adjacent cultures. Check out my recent video on what cultures we could add to Western Europe if you want to see my approach to designing new cultures for AOM. It's not the way the game currently does it, but I think it has huge potential, and there are more vids I have in the works planned about potential Norse-adjacent factions and many more besides. So what groups besides the Aesir have I not included? Well, for one, primordials and embodiments, such as Dellinger, who represented the dawn, or Not, who represented the night, and many more besides that you can see on screen right now, alongside some more obscure options. I'm not really sure what hypothetical faction these primordials might rule, but I have a couple ideas that I can elaborate on when I eventually do a video talking about Norse-adjacent cultures. Either way, though, they, I don't think, belong in the same faction as the Aesir, though I think they are honestly quite likely, especially like Dellinger, Not, Sol, and Mani, and Jörd. All of those would probably have featured in like the top to mid contender level if I had put them on my list. As another subset that I did not include on this list, the Vanir, rivals of the Aesir. Freyr, Freya, Njörður, all of them belong to this tribe, and I would personally remove them from the current Norse entirely. They could be joined by gods like Gulveig, Bela, Bigwir, Kvasir, and many more besides. Even Idun could fit here. I have a very specific reason why I think she would fit better with the Vanir, and if any of you can guess why, I will be very impressed. I have a fantastic idea for the Vanir. An idea that I think totally justifies splitting them out from the Aesir. I cannot wait to tell you about it in the Norse adjacent culture video. Let me know down in the comments if you want to see that. Another group I didn't include in this video are Jotun. While usually oversimplified as giants, the Jotun were far more nuanced. Many of them held godlike status, or at least near godlike status, within Norse myths, and they often intermarried and interbred with the gods, showing some sort of major equivalency between the two. Aegir is a prime example, recently added in the Freyr DLC. I would actually shift him to a Jotun-focused faction. As a contrasting example, Skadi, while technically a Jotun, married into the Aesir, so I think she fits better there. And Loki, also a Jotun by birth, could even fit in both in different forms. You could have him on the Aesir faction as Lother, as I mentioned earlier, and then have a full naughty trickster Loki elsewhere on a Jotun-oriented build. They could also be joined by a lot of other famous Jotun, like Surtur, most notably. I think he's an extremely high contender to be added to the current game, even if I think he would fit better on a Jotun-focused faction. And you can even make a strong case for Ymir being here as well. I have some cool ideas to how to actually implement this potential Jotun pantheon in-game, though I would be curious to hear your thoughts on how to do it as well. I don't think they should be the exact same as the Aesir, though. That much is for sure. As a couple more obscure options that I didn't include on this list, we have Valkyries, plus the Handmaidens of Frigg more broadly. The line between a major Valkyrie and like a minor goddess is pretty fuzzy, and a lot of them are used interchangeably, or minor goddesses were like linked to existing Valkyries. I even at one point debated like a 5-fold goddess on the big list that merged a bunch of these lesser goddesses together. But then I thought maybe they could actually fit as like a Valkyrie and goddess-oriented faction with like an all-female pantheon. And it could feature Valkyries like Thor's daughter Thrudr, Eir, and Muthgudr, plus some Valkyrie-like goddesses like Hlin, Var, Ver, and Snotra, along with many, many others besides. The factions surrounding them I'm not wholly sure on yet, but I think it's a pretty interesting idea. Yet another category I didn't touch on in this video are Germanic heroes. Sigurd, Beowulf, Brunhilde, and many others besides. They are famous enough that I think they could qualify as deities, though admittedly more on the demigod saint side, which I personally think is entirely fair game. I have a good idea of how I want to use these guys too, so I'll save that for the Norse adjacent cultures video. And as a last category of stuff that I did not include, we have stuff that is too obscure even for me. Stuff that I tried to make entries for on this list, and there was just so little information about them, I couldn't do it. Gods such as Ytrexyov, so poorly attested that even Melee dwarfs them. So as of now, I have no plans to add these very obscure figures to a faction unless I like desperately need a hole filled. Many of the options on this list, after all, are already pushing the limit as is. And with that, we come to the end of this Norse God Edition extravaganza. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch. I would love to hear your thoughts. Did I miss any candidates? What is your cutoff for more gods to be added to the Norse faction? Do you think that we should get more besides the Freyr DLC, presumably after we add more to others as well? And if we should add more, which ones would you like to see most? And of course, most importantly, I want to hear where you guys would like to go next in this new series. What existing faction do you want to see me add more gods to? I have tons of ideas and can't wait to share them with you. Also, make sure that you go check out Guardians Not, linked down in the description below. Like I said, the creator is a good friend of mine, an amazing artist, so I very much hope that you give his work a look. But until then, my name is Robbie Howell, and ciao for now.